Margaret Wilson had always imagined she would cry at her son's wedding. But in her imagination, the tears were warm, joyful, and surrounded by music, flowers, and family. She pictured herself sitting in the front row, dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief while watching Daniel stand proudly at the altar. She had replayed that image in her mind for years, ever since he was a little boy who used to insist he would marry Mommy when he grew up. On a quiet Thursday afternoon, Margaret stood in her kitchen rinsing strawberries when the thought surfaced again. Daniel and Clara had been together for nearly 3 years. They shared an apartment. They traveled together. Clara's social media was full of romantic dinners and weekend getaways. Surely, Margaret thought, a proposal must have happened by now. She dried her hands and picked up her phone. Daniel didn't answer. That wasn't unusual, he often silenced his phone at work. So she hesitated only a moment before calling Clara instead. "Hi, dear," Margaret said with gentle warmth. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything." "No, it's fine," Clara replied. Her tone was light, almost distracted. Margaret smiled, leaning against the counter. "I was just wondering, when's the wedding?" There was a pause. Not a shocked pause, not an embarrassed one, just a small, casual silence. "Oh," Clara said. "We got married yesterday." The words didn't register at first. Margaret thought she had misheard. "I'm sorry? We got married yesterday," Clara repeated. "At the courthouse." It was small, just something quick. Margaret felt the blood drain from her face. The kitchen seemed too bright, too still. "Yesterday?" she whispered. "Yes. We didn't want a big thing, just close friends. Simple, close friends." Margaret gripped the edge of the counter as if it were the only solid thing in the room. "That's wonderful," she managed to say. "Congratulations. Thanks. We'll send pictures." The call ended shortly after. Margaret stood there, staring at the strawberries still floating in the bowl. Yesterday. Her son had gotten married yesterday. The biggest milestone of his life had happened. And she had not only been absent, she had been unaware. She walked slowly to the living room and sat in her late husband's old armchair. The house felt different now. Not empty, it had always been quiet since Daniel moved out, but altered. As though something sacred had taken place without her permission. She remembered the years after her husband died. Daniel had been 12. He had clung to her at the funeral, promising he would take care of Mom. She had worked 2 jobs to keep him in the same school district. She had skipped vacations, postponed medical checkups, and sold jewelry to help pay for his college textbooks. Every sacrifice had felt worth it. And yet yesterday, when he stood before a judge and said his vows, he had not thought to call her. Her phone rang that evening. "Daniel." "Mom," he said, voice slightly strained. "I was going to tell you." "After?" she asked quietly. "It just happened fast. Weddings require paperwork, Daniel." He exhaled sharply. Clara didn't want family drama. "We thought keeping it small would be easier." "Family drama," Margaret repeated. "From whom?" "Just in general." Margaret closed her eyes. "I have never caused drama in your life. I know, Mom. It's not like that." But it felt exactly like that. They spoke for only a few more minutes. Polite, careful, strained. After hanging up, Margaret walked to the hallway and looked at the framed photographs on the wall. Daniel's first day of school, his high school graduation, the day he received his college diploma. In every picture, she stood beside him. Except the one that mattered most. That night, she didn't cry. The hurt was too deep for tears. Instead, she lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering when she had shifted from being essential to optional. For the first time in her life, she felt invisible. And invisibility, she realized, was a quiet kind of heartbreak. The next morning, Margaret's phone buzzed repeatedly on her bedside table. She reached for it, still heavy from a sleepless night. Notifications flooded the screen. Her heart sank before she even opened them. There it was, a photo of Daniel and Clara standing in front of the courthouse. Clara held a small bouquet. Daniel wore a gray suit Margaret had never seen before. They were laughing, faces glowing, caption, "Just married." Best surprise ever. Margaret scrolled through the album. Champagne glasses clinking. Clara's co-workers hugging her. A group selfie on the courthouse steps. Everyone looked delighted. Everyone except the person who should have been there. Her sister called within minutes. "Margaret, why didn't you tell me about the wedding?" "I didn't know," Margaret replied softly. "You're joking. I found out yesterday." There was a stunned silence on the other end. By midday, messages poured in. Church friends, old neighbors, even Daniel's former basketball coach. "Why weren't you there?" Margaret typed polite responses. It was small. They wanted something private. "I'm happy for them." Each message felt like another small cut. In the afternoon, Daniel came by. He didn't sit down. He paced. "Mom, I don't want this to turn into something bigger than it is." Margaret studied him. "It already is. We didn't mean to hurt you. Then why didn't you tell me beforehand?" He hesitated. "Clara thought if we told people, they'd expect invitations." "I wouldn't expect an invitation," Margaret said quietly. "I would expect honesty." He looked frustrated. "You're making me feel guilty." Margaret's voice stayed calm. "I feel humiliated, Daniel." That word made him pause. "I had to find out from social media. Do you know how that feels?" He didn't answer. She continued, "It's not about a party. It's about being excluded from your life." He rubbed his forehead. "We just wanted peace. And you think peace is achieved by silence?" The tension in the room thickened. Daniel finally said, "Clara feels judged by you." Margaret blinked. "I've been nothing but kind." Sometimes kindness can still feel like pressure. Margaret absorbed that. Pressure. Judged. Drama. These were narratives she hadn't known existed. "I have supported you in every decision," she said slowly. "But support doesn't mean erasure." Daniel left soon after, frustrated and defensive. Margaret closed the door gently and leaned her forehead against it. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a shift in roles. Her son was building a new primary family, and in doing so, he had quietly repositioned her to the margins. For the first time, she wondered if love without boundaries was simply permission to be overlooked, and she began to think about what boundaries might look like. A week later, Daniel and Clara came for dinner. Margaret had considered canceling, but something inside her refused to retreat. She prepared Daniel's favorite meal, roasted chicken with rosemary potatoes and lemon pie for dessert. Familiar comforts, familiar flavors. Clara arrived with a polite smile. Daniel kissed his mother's cheek, but it felt brief, formal. Dinner began stiffly. Halfway through the meal, Clara set down her fork. "We're moving," she announced. Margaret looked up. "Moving?" "Yes. Across the country." Daniel got an offer. Margaret turned to her son. "You didn't tell me, it just became official," he said. "How long have you known?" "A few weeks." "A few weeks." Margaret folded her hands in her lap. "And you weren't going to mention it?" "We were waiting for the right time," Clara interjected. Margaret nodded slowly. "It seems I'm always waiting for the right time." Daniel sighed. "Mom, we can't plan our lives around how you'll feel. When have I asked you to?" Silence. Margaret looked at Clara. "Do you believe I'm a problem?" Clara hesitated. "I think sometimes you hold on too tightly." Margaret absorbed the words. "Too tightly." "I raised him alone," she said calmly. Holding on was survival. Daniel stood up abruptly. "This is exactly what I mean." Everything becomes emotional. Margaret felt a flicker of something new, not sadness, but clarity. "You're right," she said quietly. "It is emotional. Because it matters." After they left, Margaret sat at the dining table long after the dishes cooled. She realized something painful. She had been trying to maintain closeness without demanding reciprocity. That night, she called a lawyer, not out of spite, but out of awakening. If her role in Daniel's life was diminishing, she needed to secure her own stability, emotionally and financially. She would no longer assume permanence where she was treated as temporary. And for the first time, she felt steady. 2 months later, Daniel's voice shook over the phone. "Mom, is it true you changed your will?" "Yes." "Why would you do that?" Margaret sat calmly in her living room. "Because I reviewed my priorities. For years, everything was left to me. For years, I assumed we would remain close. That's not fair." "What isn't fair," she replied gently, "is believing access to my life is optional, but access to my assets is guaranteed." He was silent. Clara got on the line. "This feels like punishment." Margaret almost smiled. "Punishment would be cutting you out entirely." "I didn't." She explained her decision clearly. A portion to a scholarship fund in her husband's name. A donation to the hospital that treated him. The rest divided thoughtfully. "I'm not angry," she said. "I'm realistic." Daniel's voice softened slightly. "So this is because of the wedding. It's because I realized love must include respect. You're hurting me." "I was hurt first," she replied gently. There was no shouting. No drama. Just a recalibration. When the call ended, Margaret felt lighter. For decades she had operated from fear. Fear of losing her son. Fear of being alone. Now she understood something profound. Security built on silence was fragile. She had not withdrawn love. She had redefined it. And in doing so, she had rediscovered herself. 6 months passed. The move happened. Calls became infrequent. Distance settled like dust. Then one evening, Daniel called. "Mom, we're having a reception, a real one. We want you there." Margaret was quiet. "Why now?" "I've had time to think," he said. "I handled everything badly." Clara's voice followed. "I'm sorry. I thought keeping things small would prevent conflict. I didn't realize it would create a bigger one." Margaret felt warmth in her chest. "I didn't need a big wedding," she said softly. "I needed acknowledgement." "We want to fix this," Daniel said. On the day of the reception, Margaret wore a simple blue dress. Nothing extravagant, just dignified. When she entered the room, Daniel walked straight to her. "This is my mother," he told the guests proudly. Not hidden, not delayed. Introduced. Margaret felt tears rise, this time from relief. The original wound would always exist. But healing had begun. She realized something important. Boundaries hadn't pushed her son away. They had taught him how to return. Love, she learned, must be visible. Respect must be mutual. And sometimes, when you stop accepting invisibility, people finally learn how to see you.